The sun beat down on Sunnyvale Estates like it was trying to bleach every blade of grass into perfect HOA-approved perfection. Every house on Maple Lane stood in identical beige siding. Every lawn trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches. Every mailbox the same brushed nickel finish. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like a magazine spread, until you lived there and realized the glossy perfection came with invisible chains wrapped around your wallet and your sanity. I was Sarah Jenkins, 42, divorced, and stubbornly in love with the one thing that made my house actually feel like mine. The riot of wildflowers spilling over the front beds and the hand-carved porch swing that creaked softly every evening while I sipped iced tea and ignored the world. Karen Whitaker, president of the Sunnyvale Estates Homeowners Association for the last 8 years, had other ideas. She arrived on my doorstep one bright Tuesday morning wearing her official navy polo with a little embroidered gavel, clipboard in hand, smile glued on like cheap veneers. "Sarah, dear, you know how much we all adore your creative touches," she cooed, voice dripping honey while her eyes sliced like razor wire. "But the covenants are very clear. No unapproved plantings. No swing that isn't regulation white. We're issuing a courtesy notice this time. $150 fine if it's not corrected by Friday." She handed me the paper like she was doing me a favor. Behind her, 2 board members, her loyal sidekick Amber in her matching polo, and Margaret, the treasurer who looked like she'd been dipped in lemon juice, nodded solemnly, as if we were discussing national security instead of my petunias. I smiled back, the same tight smile I perfected after my divorce when the world decided single moms were easy targets. "I'll look into it. Karen, thanks for stopping by." She patted my arm like a disappointed aunt. "We're all in this together. Sarah, keeping standards high keeps property values high. You understand." As their golf cart rolled away, I heard Amber giggle. She thinks those weeds are charming. Bless her heart. The words stung, but I let them. For now. That evening I sat on my illegal swing, rocking slowly, watching the identical houses glow under identical porch lights. Sunnyvale Estates had seemed like paradise when I bought it 10 years ago. Quiet streets, good schools for my daughter, and best of all, a fresh start after my ex took half of everything and left. I'd poured my soul into this house, turning the generic builder's special into something warm and alive. Now the HOA was systematically trying to sandblast every trace of me away. The next morning, the first real violation notice appeared in my mailbox, $250 for aesthetic noncompliance. Then another for the American flag. I flew on a regulation pole. Apparently the angle was 0.3 degrees off. Then the grass citation because one dandelion had dared to bloom. I paid them quietly, biting my tongue until it bled. Neighbors whispered, "Sarah's fighting the board again. Poor thing doesn't know when to quit." Karen posted on the community Facebook group, "Reminder, friends, following the rules is what makes Sunnyvale special. Some residents need extra guidance, but we're here to help." The comments piled up with laughing emojis, and you go, "Karen." I watched it all, heart pounding, but said nothing. Then came the email that changed everything. I was copying documents at the community center when Karen's phone buzzed on the counter. She left it charging while she stepped out for an important call. The screen lit up with a group chat titled Project Clean Slate. The preview line read, "Sarah's liens are almost ready. Once we hit $15,000 in fines, she'll have to sell or we foreclose. House will be perfect for Amber's cousin. Keep pushing." My stomach dropped through the floor. I snapped a photo before the screen timed out. Heart hammering so loud I was sure the whole room could hear it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screenshot until the words blurred. Clean slate. They weren't just fining me for flowers. They were manufacturing violations, backdating notices, and planning to slap a lien on my house so they could force a sale at a bargain price. "Karen," the The smiling face of community standards was running a quiet extortion racket, and I was the next victim. I remembered every sweet dear, and we're just looking out for you. I remember Margaret's cold stare and Amber's giggles. They thought I was the naive single mom who would roll over and hand them the keys. I wasn't rolling over anymore. The next day, I called my brother Carlos, the private investigator who'd helped me through the divorce. I need everything, I told him, voice steady for the first time in months. Bank records, every violation notice, and whatever dirt you can dig on Karen Whitaker. He whistled low. HOA presidents are the worst. They think the neighborhood is their kingdom. You sure you want this fight? I looked out at my wildflower beds, glowing in the sunset. They started it. Carlos. I'm ending it. While Carlos worked, I played the perfect compliant resident. I mowed the lawn at 7 a.m. Sharp. I painted the swing regulation white, then quietly repainted it the original warm oak the next night. I smiled at Karen during the monthly board meeting when she praised everyone's cooperation. Inside, I was cataloging every lie. Every forged signature on the violation logs Carlos later confirmed were backdated. They've been planning this for 2 years, ever since my house appraisal came in 40% above the neighborhood average. Karen wanted it for her nephew. Margaret wanted the commission. Amber wanted the referral fee. My home was just collateral in their little real estate empire. 3 weeks later, Carlos slid a thick folder across the coffee shop table. You're not going to believe this. Inside were property lien documents with my forged signature authorizing voluntary compliance fines. There was a spreadsheet showing how they'd already drained $8,400 from my account through escalating penalties. And at the bottom, in Karen's own handwriting, a timeline. Phase 1, accumulate $15,000 liens. Phase 2, foreclose or force sale. Phase 3, Amber's cousin moves in. House finally belongs to people who understand standards. The same phrase Margaret had used at the last meeting, some people just don't belong here. I stared at the pages until my eyes burned. They've been treating my house like a pawn in their game for years, smiling to my face while sharpening the knife. The woman who preached community was running a fraud ring dressed up in navy polos and clipboards. But the worst part, the part that made me laugh through the rage, was the final note. Life insurance policy on the property owner might be useful if she fights back too hard. They weren't just stealing my house. They were discussing ways to make sure I couldn't stop them. That night, I lay awake listening to the creak of my porch swing, the one they hated so much. Karen thought she was untouchable behind her HOA throne. She thought the rules protected her, but rules cut both ways, and I was about to rewrite them. The next morning, I kissed my daughter goodbye for school and drove straight to Carlos's office, the folder burning a hole in my passenger seat. We need proof that can't be dismissed as coincidence, he said, cracking his knuckles. And we need to catch her in the act. His plan was simple, ruthless, and deliciously ironic. We'd dangle the biggest community project Sunnyvale Estates had ever seen, a $3 million grant from an anonymous tech widow named Patricia Chun who wanted to fund a new clubhouse and community center. The catch: the donor specifically requested my architectural input because she'd seen my work online. Karen would salivate at the chance to control millions in HOA money and take credit for the glory. I spent 2 weeks designing fake renderings of a stunning modern clubhouse that deliberately broke every single covenant Karen loved. Glass walls, wild landscaping, even a small pond. Carlos hired an actress and rented the upscale community center conference room. I told the board I'd been approached by this generous donor and would present the proposal at the next emergency meeting. Karen's eyes lit up like Christmas lights when I casually mentioned the figure during our weekly compliance check. Sarah, dear, that's wonderful. Of course, the board should be involved to ensure everything meets standards. Translation: she was already planning how to hijack the entire thing. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend pretending to be nervous, asking Karen for advice on how to impress such an important donor. She ate it up, lecturing me on speaking the language of people who understand true value. Every word dripped with the same condescension she used when citing my flowers. Inside, I was recording every syllable on the tiny device Carlos had slipped me. Tuesday arrived gray and drizzly. Perfect weather for watching empires crumble. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and desperation. Karen arrived early in new blazer, hair sprayed into submission, clipboard thicker than ever. Amber and Margaret flanked her like bodyguards. I presented my renderings first, watching Karen's face twist between greed and disgust at the non-compliant design. Then Patricia Chun, our actress, entered, pearls gleaming, voice cultured and slightly bored. I was so impressed with Sarah's vision, she said. But my financial advisor insists the HOA board must approve every detail for liability reasons. Karen practically levitated. Of course, we'd be delighted to take the lead on structuring this properly. She launched into a 20-minute monologue about elevating the project to true Sunnyvale standards, casually suggesting that my designs were a charming starting point but needed professional refinement. I sat there pretending to look crushed while the hidden microphones captured every patronizing word. Sarah is creative. Bless her. But for a project of this magnitude, we need someone who understands luxury and compliance. I've managed this neighborhood for 8 years. I know exactly what donors like Mrs. shouldn't expect. Patricia leaned forward, feigning confusion. But isn't this Sarah's proposal? Karen smiled the smile of a shark scenting blood. Sarah will still be involved. Of course, as a consultant. The primary contract should run through the HOA board for proper oversight. It's really the best solution for everyone. The words hung in the air like smoke. She was doing it again, stealing my work, my reputation, my future, in front of witnesses, all while wearing her polite president mask. After the meeting, Karen cornered Patricia privately while I pretended to pack up. Carlos's hidden camera caught every second. Between us, Karen whispered, Sarah's a bit limited. Sweet girl, but she doesn't grasp the bigger picture. Once this grant is secured, I'll make sure the board handles all the finances. You'll want someone sophisticated managing millions. She even floated the idea of waiting until certain neighborhood transitions were complete before finalizing. Code for finishing the lien process on my house first. I drove home that night with the recordings burning in my pocket and something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest. Karen had just admitted on tape to planning to hijack millions while simultaneously bankrupting me. But the real bomb came later when Carlos sent the final text screenshots his contact had pulled from Karen's cloud backup. In the group chat she'd written to Amber and Margaret, once Sarah's lien hits $20,000, the insurance payout on the property will cover any unfortunate accident if she tries to fight us. House finally belongs to people who deserve it. They weren't just stealing my home. They were casually discussing my disappearance. I stared at the message until the letters swam. The woman who spent years lecturing me about community values was plotting to have me removed permanently if the financial squeeze didn't work. Black humor bubbled up through the rage. Karen Whitaker, defender of 2.5-inch grass, was now a conspiracy theorist with a body count on her to-do list. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it weren't my life on the line. Carlos's voice on the phone was grim. Sarah, this just crossed from fraud into something darker. We need to end it now. His new plan was surgical. We would let Karen think she'd won a grant. Then, at the next full board meeting open to all residents, I would present one final document from the donor. And the police financial crimes unit Carlos had quietly looped and would be waiting outside. I spent the next week being the model resident again, paying the latest $750 fine without complaint, smiling at Karen in the grocery store while she gushed about our exciting new project. She even patted my shoulder and said, "See, Dear, when you work with the board instead of against us, wonderful things happen. I smiled so sweetly my cheeks hurt. You're absolutely right. Karen, wonderful things are definitely about to happen. The night before the big meeting, I sat on my porch swing one last time, listening to it creak like an old friend saying goodbye. The flowers were still blooming defiantly. The house still felt like mine. Karen thought she'd already won. She had no idea the trap was already closed around her neck. The community hall was packed. Every resident who'd ever received a fine. Every retiree who feared the next citation. Every teenager who hated the no basketball hoops rule showed up for the historic grand announcement. Karen stood at the podium in her best blazer, hair helmet firmly in place, beaming like a queen addressing her subjects. Amber and Margaret sat in the front row, smug and satisfied. I sat in the back, hands folded, heart steady. Karen launched into her speech with practiced sincerity. Friends, today marks a new chapter for Sunnyvale Estates. Thanks to the generous vision of Mrs. Patricia Chun and the careful oversight of your board, we're bringing a world-class community center to our neighborhood. Applause rippled. She gestured grandly to the renderings I'd created, the same one she'd called charming but limited days earlier. Of course, the board will ensure every detail meets our high standards. Then she introduced me to say a few words about the initial concept. I walked to the podium, smiled at the crowd, and said exactly what we'd rehearsed. Actually, Mrs. Chen asked me to present one final requirement before the funds are released. I unfolded the single sheet of paper I'd been carrying for weeks, the real star of the show. She requires written confirmation that every board member has reviewed and personally signed the compliance addendum attached to the grant. No exceptions. Karen's smile faltered for half a second. Of course we'll sign whatever is needed. I slid the paper across the podium. It's right here. Just needs your signatures. As Karen, Amber, and Margaret leaned in to sign, the side door opened and two plainclothes detectives stepped inside. Carlos had timed it perfectly. Karen Whitaker, Amber Lawson, Margaret Whitaker, you're under investigation for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, the lead detective announced, voice cutting through the sudden silence like a guillotine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's pen froze mid-signature. This is preposterous, she sputtered, but her voice cracked. The detective continued, reading the charges, backdated violation notices, forged lien authorizations, misappropriation of homeowner funds. Every accusation landed like a slap. I stepped forward, voice calm but carrying to every corner. For 8 years, you've told us the rules protect us. You told me my flowers and my swing threatened property values. You told the whole neighborhood I was the problem. I held up my phone and hit play. Karen's own voice filled the hall. Sarah's a bit limited. Once the lien hits, the insurance payout will cover any unfortunate accident. House finally belongs to people who deserve it. The room exploded. Residents who'd been terrorized for years started shouting. You've been fining me for my bird feeder. My lawn was half an inch too long, and you threatened foreclosure. Karen's face drained of color until she looked like a wax figure melting under the fluorescent lights. Amber tried to slip out the back, but another officer blocked her. Margaret clutched her pearls like they could save her. The detectives cuffed them right there in front of everyone. Karen's last words as they led her away were almost poetic in their absurdity. But I was only enforcing the covenants. The crowd laughed, the bitter, relieved laughter of people who'd finally watched the tyrant fall. I stood at the podium watching her perfect hairdo come undone as she struggled. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. Outside, the police van door slammed. Carlos hugged me hard. You did it, sis. One paper, one trap, and the whole kingdom crumbled. But the story wasn't over. The real courtroom drama was still coming. 3 months later, the civil suit against the HOA board and its former president reached the county courthouse. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same wooden benches creaked under nervous residents who'd shown up to watch justice. Karen sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, her usual polished veneer replaced by cheap fabric and desperation. Amber and Margaret flanked her like fallen soldiers, eyes darting. My lawyer slid the thick binder of evidence across to the judge. Recordings, forged documents, bank records, the works. Judge Patricia Hawkins looked exactly like the kind of woman who'd spent 30 years watching entitled people try to game the system. She listened to Karen's lawyer stammer about overzealous enforcement and misunderstandings. Then it was my turn. I walked to the bench and handed her the single folded sheet, the same innocent-looking paper that had started the chain reaction at the community meeting. Your Honor, this is the final piece. The one document that proves none of their actions were legal. Judge Hawkins unfolded it slowly. Her eyebrows rose. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. And then, unbelievably, she started laughing. Real, deep, courtroom-shaking laughter that made every head turn. Unbelievable, she said, wiping her eyes. Mrs. Jenkins, you are one smart woman. The paper contained one simple typed sentence with my signature and a notary stamp. I, Sarah Jenkins, never signed any HOA amendment authorizing retroactive liens or special assessments. And my property was purchased outright prior to the current covenants being recorded. No such agreement exists in county records. Karen's lawyer turned white. Your Honor, we were led to believe. Of course you were, the judge cut in, still chuckling. Because your client forged documents, backdated notices, and built an entire extortion scheme on lies. In 30 years on this bench, I've seen a lot of power trips, but rarely one wrapped in such self-righteous hypocrisy. She looked straight at Karen. You preach community while plotting to bankrupt and possibly harm a resident for profit. You weaponized rules meant to protect people and turned them into a personal ATM. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The gavel came down like thunder. My house was mine, free and clear. All fines reversed. The HOA board dissolved pending new elections. Karen, Amber, and Margaret faced criminal charges on top of the civil judgment. Restitution, community service, and a permanent restraining order barring any of them from ever serving on another HOA. As they led Karen out in cuffs for the second time, she passed my row. Our eyes met. The woman who once cooed deer now looked like a cornered animal. You were supposed to be easy, she hissed. I leaned in just enough for her to hear. That's the thing about people who follow the rules. Karen, sometimes the rules catch up with you instead. The courtroom erupted in applause. Residents I barely knew hugged me in the hallway. My daughter squeezed my hand. Mom, you actually did it. 6 months later, I stood on my porch swing, the original warm oak one I'd quietly restored the day after the ruling, watching the sunset paint my wildflower beds in gold. The grass was still 2.5 inches because I liked it that way, not because anyone forced me. The new HOA board, elected by actual residents, had repealed half the ridiculous covenants and replaced Karen's standards with common sense. My house was finally, truly mine. No liens, no threats, no clipboard-wielding tyrants. The architecture firm I'd started in the spare bedroom was booming. Turns out people love hiring the woman who took down the most notorious HOA Karen in the county. New clients kept saying the same thing. We saw your story. If you can fight that, you can design anything. Carlos stopped by every Sunday with pizza and victory stories. You know what the best part is? He asked one evening. Feet up on the railing. You didn't just win. You made it funny. The way the judge laughed? Legendary. I smiled into my iced tea. The black humor had kept me sane. The absurdity of grown adults obsessing over grass length while running a fraud ring. The laugh while furious moments that turned rage into fuel. Across the street, the old Whitaker house sat empty. Karen was serving 18 months for conspiracy and forgery. Amber took a plea and moved out of state. Margaret's social circle had evaporated faster than cheap spray tan. The neighborhood that once feared them now told the story at block parties like a cautionary tale. Remember when the HOA tried to steal Sarah's house? One piece of paper and boom, gone. I rocked slowly, listening to the swing creak. The flowers still bloomed wild and unapologetic. The house still felt warm and lived in. And somewhere in the distance, a new resident was probably hanging their own unapproved wind chime, testing the new board's patience. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against people who abuse the rules is simply refusing to play by their version of them. I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, not just a house, but a life where I finally belonged on my own terms. The woman they called limited and not sophisticated enough had just rewritten the entire neighborhood rulebook. And the best part? The rules now worked for everyone else too.